Okay, I'm back as promised with part 2 of Beach Scene in Oil. I've done a little bit to the clouds since we were here last. I have added some alizarin crimson with a little bit of blue to form a gray for the bottoms of some of the clouds. And I've taken the corner of my dry brush to make the changes, to blend them in. But you should have some variety, not only some roundish areas, but some straight ones as well. And then I have a few little stray clouds up here and some very faint ones here. And you'll notice that the lights are on this side of the clouds. And when this is dry, I'll probably go back over it again and emphasize some of those clouds. But for now, I'm satisfied to leave that be. Now I'm going to work on the sand because I want my sand to go up to about here, and I will be painting a darker sand color so that when that's dry I can use a dry brush to go over it with white to create my little sand dunes and little patches of sea oats and seagrass. So for now I'm going to be mixing up a sand color, and in my part of the country the sand is, well, the wet sand is gray. And if you remember what I said earlier about graying down colors, that orange is the complement of blue, which makes a gray. And that is precisely what I want for my sand underpainting. So I'll just keep mixing that until I get the color I want. And color mixing is a mystery to new painters especially. Let me see. That looks like it's going to be okay. But my suggestion is that you mix the colors with a palette knife. Just an inexpensive one will do. And then mix little small amounts of color. And if you can't get the color you're looking for, then don't keep adding more color to that one area, because it's ultimately going to be mud for you. Okay. So I got a color I liked and then I lost it. But like I said, start with your color mixing in small amounts. And then for the most part, if you remember the colors that you use, you can come and mix them right on the canvas. I like to do that. And this is a very good reason to paint your edges as you go along, because if you don't, you may never get that color again. Just like here, I have a couple of tones of this gray. Some warm and some cool. And for the most part, that really doesn't make that much difference because I'm going to be covering a lot of it up. But I will need to be sure that what's under here is at least a reasonable facsimile of mud in this case. I'm using the liquid to make this go on easier. And it's thinning it out a bit too much maybe, but I've got my underpainting. So all is not lost. This is the same color that's ultimately going to be up here next to my water, because that area for sure is mud. And is it okay that I have these various shades of gray? Not a bit. In fact, it's actually kind of nice. I have lots of photographs that I've taken from the beach. And I try to compose my photographs as if they were going to be paintings, because in fact, that's what happens. But in doing that, it gives me a sense of the bigger picture of the composition. And then when I have the photographs, I can look closely at what's happening and then represent the beach and the sea oats fairly realistically. And that's not always the main objective. But for new painters, it's nice when things look like the subject from which they're painted. I'm liking what's happening here. Remember to do the edge. One of my painting students commented that when she's painting at home alone, she can hear my voice in her head. Which is not a bad thing if you're paying attention. Then your teacher becomes a teacher in your head. Now, I'm not too concerned about these brush strokes, but I am going to lightly feather them so they'll be a little bit blended. A lot of little details are going to come over this area. Well, I hope you can see. Let me get this a little bit more straight. I have this close up so that you can see what I have done so far. I've worked a little bit more on my clouds, and I've put some heaviness under them. But what I want to show you today is how I put the water in. Now, this is going to be more beach than sea, so I want everything to be in the distance. So nothing's going to be really detailed. So I've already worked somewhat, but I use a very small brush. It's number 2 in this case, Robert Simmons Craft Painter, which is a flat bristle brush, and it's not bristle, excuse me, it is a synthetic brush. And I'm using just pure white at this point. What I do first, well, I have to take the tape off, and then I very carefully do a line where my horizon is going to be. And I've put in a darker blue at the very edge, and then I'm bringing it lighter coming forward. And then with paint just on the tip of my brush, let me see if I can find myself here. Oh, okay. Then I just somewhat skip along and make these distant breaking waves, and I don't want them to be too regular, so some of them will be thinner, and they shouldn't be equal distance either, because of the fact that that's not necessarily the way they work. For some reason I can't make that paint come off my brush. If you've ever been to the beach and watched waves break, you know that they're just little white caps in the distance. Now you want to come on down, and it's really entirely up to you how wide you want this beach to be, whether you want it to be high tide or low tide. Okay, let's get lost again. Bring this so that you can see the full painting, pretty much the full painting. And I'm just going to keep going across here. And this gives you some idea why I like to use a tinted canvas. And the color of the tint will depend on what you need to put over the top of it. Now, as long as this paint is wet, which will actually be for a couple of days, I can go back in and go back over these tiny strokes and work them in. Now, what happens on the edges of where these waves have broken on the sand is that they leave behind some little bubbles. So you want to create some of those bubbly things. And because the background is already blue. It may take a little effort to make them white, but you want to do somewhat of a scallop on those places because the waves don't come in at exactly the same place every time. So these should be a little bit curved. And all of these marks that I'm putting here can have shadows. And that's what's going to distinguish them. Now at this point, while I have your attention, and before I finish going all the way across, I want to show you what I do with the sand. Because the sand underneath where the waves are splashing on the shore is wet. So here's where my sand color comes back in. Now this is a little bit too dark to suit me. So I'm going to put a little bit of white up to that. I'm going to leave that dark area right up next to the little bubbly areas. Now this gets to be sort of tedious work, especially with a smaller painting, but doing it with a small brush and doing it in small increments makes the painting overall look much more alive. The person who taught the only acrylics class I ever had did her beach scenes in acrylics, and they were very pretty when she was finished, but they just didn't have the aesthetic look that I thought they needed to have. So I was glad to work with oils because I can work with more colors. That's personal preference, and I'm going to say, actually, if you want to sell your work, then you need to consider what the tourist population in your area might be looking for. They don't notice the nuance in color changes. So if they're not there, they probably won't miss them. I like painting beach scenes, but I do not like painting them in acrylics because they're too stiff, too much like color book painting. Now, I hope you can notice right in here, I just left that streak of white. So if the color changes and doesn't blend real well, not a problem. I will continue this all the way across the beach. And it's pretty important that you get this part done before you ever start to do sea oats, because sea oats are going to come up over it. And what's happening under those sea oats just has to stay under those sea oats, but it's very hard to neatly cover them up or work around them. Still a little too orange to suit me. Now, right about here, the sand's going to start to get really white, so I won't go down too much further on that part. And with a rigger, or liner brush, whatever you want to call it, you can take some of your dark blue mixture and I would suggest that you use maybe a little bit of alizarin crimson in it to make it a little darker, not so blue. Just come right under the edge. And this is the place where you can indicate that these are a little bit round, and because they're at such a distance and pretty much flat, you don't have to pay a lot of attention to those dark areas. And if you get it too dark and or too wide, that's quite likely with these tiny brushes. Then you can come back when it's dry. And fix that. Now the same is true for these waves that are getting a little bit closer. Can't see a whole lot of this going on out there, but here's a little wave that might be breaking. I would suggest, if you've never done any beach scene painting and if you don't happen to have a lot of photographs that you can look at, that you go to a beach and actually pay attention to where the highlights and the shadows and certain breaking waves. Some waves break forward and parallel to your visual field. Some come in somewhat sideways, and so they curl over in a different way. So pay attention to that. But that's basically all I want to show you today, and I'll continue to work on this. And I see right in this area, I need to tone that down just a little bit more while it's wet. And I will be back shortly to continue. Thank you for watching.